The world often feels heavy, uncertain, and frightening. Every day people wake up carrying fears they rarely speak about. Some fear losing their loved ones, others fear failure, betrayal, sickness, loneliness, poverty, or the future itself. Human beings naturally search for safety because the heart was created to seek peace and protection. Yet many people spend their lives searching for security in temporary things. Some depend completely on money, thinking wealth will protect them from pain. Others depend on powerful people, status, relationships, or worldly success. But no matter how much a person owns, the fear inside the heart does not completely disappear because the dunya itself was never created to give permanent security. Everything in this life changes. Health changes, people change, circumstances change, and even strong empires collapse. This is why hearts remain restless when they are disconnected from Allah. A person without connection to Allah can appear strong on the outside while feeling completely broken within. They may smile in front of others but silently suffer every night. Anxiety increases because the soul feels distant from its creator. The heart was designed to remember Allah, and when it forgets Him, emptiness enters slowly. This emptiness creates fear because the person begins believing they are alone against the world. Every problem then feels larger than life itself. Even small difficulties seem impossible to handle because the soul has no spiritual anchor holding it firm. The modern world constantly feeds fear into people's minds. News, social media, competition, and comparison make many people feel insecure. They worry about what others think, what tomorrow may bring, or what disaster might happen next. Fear becomes so normal that people begin living in survival mode instead of peace. Some become emotionally exhausted because they are trying to control every outcome themselves. They forget that human beings were never meant to carry the burden of the entire world on their shoulders. Allah never asked His servants to control everything. He asked them to trust Him. When a person lives far from Allah, they begin attaching their happiness to unstable things. If people praise them, they feel valuable. If people reject them, they feel destroyed. If money comes, they feel safe. If money disappears, panic enters their hearts. Their emotional state becomes controlled by circumstances because their trust is rooted in creation rather than the Creator. This is one of the greatest causes of spiritual weakness. The dunya was never meant to be the foundation of peace because everything within it is temporary. Allah allows hardships in life not to destroy people but to wake them up. Sometimes pain becomes the reason a person finally turns sincerely toward Allah. A difficult moment can teach someone that no human being can truly save them except their Lord. When every worldly support disappears, the believer discovers that Allah was always enough. Many people only realize the value of closeness to Allah after experiencing heartbreak, loss, betrayal, or fear. Those moments strip away false dependencies and reveal the reality that the human heart desperately needs its Creator. The world can feel unsafe because evil exists, injustice exists, and trials exist. But the believer understands something powerful. This dunya was never promised to be perfect. It was promised to be a test. Tests are not signs that Allah hates His servants. Often they are signs that Allah wants to elevate them. A believer who understands this no longer views every hardship as punishment. Instead, they begin seeing trials as opportunities to draw closer to Allah. Even storms become easier to face when the heart knows Allah is in control. Fear itself is not always negative. Fear can become a doorway back to Allah. When people realize their weakness, they begin seeking divine strength. The danger comes when fear controls the heart completely and pushes a person away from hope. Shaitan wants believers to feel abandoned and helpless. He whispers thoughts that create despair, anxiety, and hopelessness. But Allah repeatedly reminds believers in the Quran not to despair of His mercy. No matter how dark life becomes, Allah's power is always greater than the problem. Many people think peace comes when life becomes easy, but true peace actually comes when the heart trusts Allah deeply. There are believers who face enormous trials yet remain calm because their faith gives them strength. And there are people with comfortable lives who remain anxious because their hearts are spiritually empty. Real peace is not the absence of problems. Real peace is the presence of Allah in the heart during problems. The believer learns that worldly life will always contain uncertainty. Tomorrow is unknown, people may disappoint us, and situations may suddenly change, but Allah never changes. His mercy never decreases, His power never weakens, and His wisdom never fails. This understanding transforms the way a believer views life. Instead of panicking over every difficulty, they begin relying upon Allah with sincerity. Tawakkul does not mean a person stops making effort. It means they stop believing that effort alone controls results. They work hard while knowing Allah is the true protector and provider. A heart connected to Allah becomes stronger than circumstances. Even when tears fall from the eyes, the soul remains hopeful. Even during pain, there is hidden tranquility because the believer knows Allah sees every silent struggle. Human beings may misunderstand your pain, but Allah understands every emotion hidden inside the chest. He knows the fears you cannot explain to anyone else. He hears the du'as you whisper secretly at night. He knows every wound caused by betrayal, disappointment, or loneliness. This realization changes everything. The believer stops seeking complete validation from people because Allah's presence becomes enough. They stop fearing creation excessively because they remember the Creator controls all things. Even if the entire world tries to harm someone, nothing can happen without Allah's permission. This belief creates extraordinary inner strength. It removes the chains of fear that keep people spiritually trapped. True protection comes from the Creator because only Allah possesses complete power over every seen and unseen thing. Human beings can offer temporary support, but their abilities are limited. A doctor may treat illness, but healing ultimately comes from Allah. A friend may comfort the heart, but lasting peace comes from Allah. Security systems may protect homes, but ultimate protection still belongs to Allah alone. This is why believers constantly turn toward Him in every situation. Allah's protection is not always visible in obvious ways. Sometimes He protects people from dangers they never even notice. The delayed journey, a closed door, rejected opportunity, or an unexpected hardship may actually be divine protection hidden behind temporary disappointment. Human beings only see a small part of reality, but Allah sees the entire picture. What appears painful today may later reveal itself as mercy. When Allah strengthens someone, fear loses its control over them. Their confidence no longer comes from worldly status, but from knowing Allah is with them. This spiritual strength cannot be bought with wealth or fame. It is a gift Allah places into believing hearts. Such people still experience pain, but pain no longer destroys them completely because their foundation is stronger than circumstances. One of the greatest forms of protection Allah gives believers is inner peace. The world may remain chaotic, but the heart feels calm through remembrance of Allah. Dhikr has the power to heal emotional exhaustion because it reconnects the soul to its source of strength. The modern world also increases fear by constantly surrounding people with uncertainty and comparison. Social media often makes people feel inadequate because they compare their lives to carefully edited images of others. News channels continuously broadcast disasters, conflicts, tragedies, and crises, causing many hearts to live in constant anxiety. Society teaches people to fear failure, fear being judged, fear not achieving enough, or fear not fitting in. Over time, fear becomes part of daily life. People wake up stressed, spend the day overwhelmed, and sleep carrying emotional exhaustion. Shaitan also plays a major role in strengthening fear inside the hearts of believers. One of his greatest goals is to weaken trust in Allah. He whispers thoughts that create hopelessness and panic. He wants people to feel abandoned, powerless, and spiritually disconnected. He reminds them constantly of their problems while making them forget Allah's mercy and power. A person may begin believing their situation is impossible to fix. Their sins are too great to be forgiven, or their pain will never end. These whispers slowly darken the heart if a person does not fight them with faith and remembrance of Allah. Fear becomes especially dangerous when it controls a person's relationship with people. Many individuals spend their entire lives seeking approval from others because they fear rejection or criticism. They become emotionally dependent upon human validation. If people praise them, they feel happy. If people criticize them, they feel broken. Their emotional stability becomes controlled by creation rather than the Creator. This is why even successful people can remain deeply insecure inside. Human approval is temporary and unstable, but Allah's acceptance brings lasting peace. Another reason fear controls hearts is because many people focus only on worldly causes while forgetting the one who controls all causes. They see problems as bigger than themselves because they forget Allah is bigger than every problem. When faith becomes weak, fear naturally becomes stronger. The heart starts believing that money controls provision, people control destiny, or worldly systems control outcomes. But believers are reminded repeatedly in Islam that nothing happens except by Allah's permission. No difficulty enters life without His knowledge, and no hardship lasts forever. Sometimes fear grows because people carry wounds from past experiences. Betrayal, heartbreak, trauma, disappointment, or loss can deeply affect the heart. A person who has suffered before may begin fearing future pain constantly. They may build emotional walls or become consumed with worry about what could happen next. This emotional burden becomes even heavier when someone suffers without spiritual healing. Without connection to Allah, pain can transform into despair. But with faith, even painful experiences can become sources of wisdom and strength. Fear also increases when people become too attached to the dunya. The more someone believes worldly things are their ultimate source of happiness, the more terrified they become of losing them. A person deeply attached to wealth fears poverty. A person attached to status fears humiliation. A person attached to relationships fears abandonment. But when the heart becomes attached to Allah above all else, fear begins losing its power. The believer still values blessings, but their heart understands that Allah is greater than every worldly possession. The Quran repeatedly teaches believers not to live as prisoners of fear. Allah reminds His servants that He is always near, always watching, and always fully capable of helping them. This divine reminder changes the way believers face life. Instead of seeing themselves alone against the world, they begin seeing themselves under the care of the most merciful. Fear may still appear, but it no longer controls them completely because trust in Allah creates inner stability. The prophets themselves experienced fear at times because they were human, but their fear never destroyed their trust in Allah. When Prophet Musa stood before the sea with enemies behind him, others panicked in despair. Yet he remained firm because he trusted Allah's help would arrive. This teaches believers an important lesson. Fear itself is not weakness, but forgetting Allah during fear is what weakens the soul. A believer can feel afraid while still remaining spiritually strong through tawakkul. The more distant a heart becomes from Allah, the more fear dominates it. And the closer a heart comes to Allah, the more peace enters it. This is why acts of worship are not merely rituals. Salah, Quran, Dua, and Tika strengthen the soul against fear. They remind believers that Allah controls every outcome. Even when life feels uncertain, the believer knows their Lord is never absent. Allah sees every hidden struggle, even the ones people never speak about. Human beings often hide their pain behind smiles because they fear being misunderstood or judged. Many suffer silently through anxiety, heartbreak, loneliness, emotional exhaustion, or private battles nobody else notices. A person may appear calm externally while carrying storms inside their chest. But no hidden tear, silent prayer, or unspoken fear remains unseen by Allah. One of the most comforting realities in Islam is knowing that Allah's knowledge is complete and perfect. Human beings only see what appears outwardly, but Allah sees what lives deep within hearts. He knows every disappointment someone has endured, every betrayal they survived, every fear they hide, and every burden they silently carry. Even when people fail to understand your pain, Allah fully understands it. This awareness gives believers enormous comfort because they realize they are never truly alone. Many people feel isolated because they think nobody understands their struggles. Sometimes loved ones may dismiss their feelings or fail to recognize how deeply they are hurting. This can create emotional loneliness. But Allah's understanding is unlike human understanding. He knows not only what happened to you, but also how it affected your heart. He knows the thoughts you cannot explain and the wounds you cannot describe in words. Allah sees the tears that fall late at night when nobody else is awake. He hears the du'as whispered quietly through pain and desperation. There are moments when believers feel emotionally exhausted and cannot even express their feelings properly. Yet Allah understands even the silence of the heart. A person may struggle to explain their emotions to others, but Allah already knows every detail before they even speak. This divine awareness should strengthen believers during difficult times. Sometimes people think their suffering is unnoticed because answers to prayers seem delayed. Shaitan may whisper that Allah has forgotten them, But Allah never forgets His servants. Delays are not abandonment. Often Allah is preparing something greater, teaching patience, purifying sins, or strengthening faith through hardship. Human beings see only the present moment, but Allah sees the entire future and every hidden wisdom behind events. Allah's awareness of hidden struggles also reminds believers to remain sincere. Since Allah sees what lives inside the heart, external appearances alone are not enough. A person may appear righteous before people while hiding arrogance, jealousy, or hypocrisy internally. On the other hand, someone may appear weak before society while secretly possessing deep sincerity beloved to Allah. True value is not measured by worldly image, but by the condition of the heart. When believers understand that Allah sees every struggle, they stop feeling hopeless during pain. Every moment of patience becomes meaningful because Allah witnesses it fully. Every sacrifice made for His sake is recorded. Every act of worship done privately is known to Him. Real power belongs to the one who controls hearts, destinies, and outcomes. Enemies do not always appear as people. Sometimes the greatest enemy is fear itself. Sometimes it is anxiety, temptation, depression, hopelessness, or negative thoughts. Shaitan is also a dangerous enemy because his goal is to weaken the believer spiritually. He whispers doubts, increases despair, and tries to separate people from Allah. Yet even Shaitan himself has no power over those who sincerely seek refuge in Allah. His whispers become weak when the heart remains connected to faith, remembrance, and trust in Allah. Believers often face moments where problems appear impossible. A person may feel trapped by debt, illness, family conflict, betrayal, or emotional pain. The situation may seem too large to escape. But Allah can change circumstances in ways human beings never expect. One moment of divine mercy can transform an entire life. This is why believers never allow themselves to fall completely into despair. No matter how severe the difficulty becomes, Allah's power remains greater than the hardship. When Prophet Ibrahim was thrown into the fire, worldly logic suggested destruction was inevitable. Fire burns by nature, yet Allah commanded the fire to become cool and safe. This story teaches believers that natural laws themselves remain under Allah's control. Human beings often think situations are final because they only understand worldly limitations. But Allah is not limited by anything. He creates solutions where none seem possible. Similarly, when Prophet Musa stood before the sea while enemies approached behind him, people around him panicked because they saw no escape. But Allah opened a path through the sea itself. This teaches believers that Allah can create relief from directions the human mind cannot imagine. Sometimes believers become trapped in overthinking because they try to calculate solutions based only on what they can currently see. But Allah's help is beyond human calculations. This understanding gives believers extraordinary courage during difficult times. It does not mean they never feel fear, sadness, or pressure. Rather, it means those emotions no longer control them completely because faith reminds them that Allah is greater than every challenge. A believer may stand alone against enormous opposition yet remain spiritually strong because they know Allah's support is enough. People often become emotionally weak when they rely too heavily on human protection. They think certain people hold complete power over their lives. They fear losing approval, opportunities, relationships, or status because they forget that provision and destiny are written by Allah. Human beings may try to harm, betray, or block someone, but nothing succeeds unless Allah allows it. This belief creates inner freedom. The believer stops living as a prisoner of people's opinions and actions. There are moments when believers experience injustice and wonder why Allah allowed it. But even during oppression, Allah's wisdom remains perfect. Sometimes trials expose hidden truths, purify sins, strengthen faith, or prepare believers for greater blessings later. Human beings often judge situations too quickly because they only see the immediate pain. But Allah sees every hidden outcome and every future consequence. Knowing Allah's power also strengthens patience. A believer understands that revenge, anger, or panic are not always necessary because Allah is fully capable of defending His servants. This creates calmness even during difficulty. A person no longer feels the need to control everything because they trust divine justice. They know Allah sees every Arabic dot, Arabic lamb, Arabic meme, every betrayal and every hidden intention. When the heart truly believes no enemy is greater than Allah's power, anxiety begins decreasing. Fear of people weakens because fear of Allah becomes greater. Worldly threats lose their ability to completely break the soul because the believer's confidence is rooted in the Creator. Even death itself no longer appears terrifying in the same way because believers know their lives remain in Allah's hands from beginning to end. This belief also protects believers from hopelessness during global chaos and uncertainty. The world constantly changes. Wars happen, crises spread, injustice appears everywhere, and corruption grows. Yet Allah remains fully in control over all creation. Nothing escapes His knowledge or authority. Even when events seem overwhelming, believers trust that Allah's wisdom governs everything perfectly. The strongest hearts are not hearts that never face enemies or hardships. The strongest hearts are those that continue trusting Allah despite hardships. Spiritual strength comes from certainty that Allah's help is always near, even when unseen. Sometimes Allah removes the difficulty quickly. Other times He strengthens the believer through the difficulty itself. In both cases, His mercy remains present. Inner peace begins with Tawakkul because the heart was never meant to carry life's burdens alone. Tawakkul means placing trust in Allah completely while still making sincere effort. Many people misunderstand trust in Allah. They think it means doing nothing and waiting passively. But true Tawakkul combines action with reliance upon Allah. A believer works hard, makes responsible choices, and strives sincerely while understanding that ultimate outcomes belong only to Allah. Without Tawakkul, the human heart becomes exhausted. People constantly overthink every situation because they feel personally responsible for controlling every result. They become consumed by anxiety about the future, failure, or fear of losing what they love. This emotional pressure slowly drains peace from the soul. The mind keeps racing endlessly because the person feels trapped trying to manage life entirely through their own strength. Tawakkul changes this completely. It teaches believers that while effort is necessary, control ultimately belongs to Allah alone. This realization creates deep inner relief. The believer no longer feels crushed under the burden of needing to guarantee outcomes. They do their best and leave the rest to Allah with sincerity. One of the reasons people struggle to find peace is because they are attached to certainty about the future. Human beings naturally want reassurance, control, and predictability. But life was designed to contain uncertainty. Nobody knows exactly what tomorrow holds. A person may plan carefully and still face unexpected changes. Without Tawakkul, this uncertainty creates fear and frustration. But with trust in Allah, uncertainty becomes easier to bear because the believer knows their future rests with the most merciful. Tawakkul does not remove emotions completely. Believers still feel sadness, stress, and concern during hardships. Even the prophets experienced emotional pain. But trust in Allah prevents those emotions from destroying the heart entirely. There remains a hidden calmness beneath the struggle because the soul knows Allah is managing every detail wisely. People often search for peace in temporary distractions. Some try to escape anxiety through entertainment, wealth, social validation, or endless busyness. But these things only provide short-term relief because they do not address the soul's deeper need for connection with Allah. True inner peace begins when the heart stops depending entirely on dunya for security and starts depending upon Allah. A believer with Tawakkul understands that delayed answers do not mean Allah has abandoned them. Sometimes Allah delays something because the timing is not yet right. Sometimes He withholds one thing to give something better later. Sometimes hardship itself becomes a hidden blessing that strengthens faith, purifies sins, or redirects life toward goodness.